I'm just coming off another very long call, 3 hours. And then before then another one. So it's kind of.
We're live. Good luck.
But this is the highlight of the day.
Okay, so a very good afternoon to you all, and thank you for joining us on this discussion today, which will be focused on managing effective crisis communication, COVID-19 perspective, with a specific overview on the Africa region. We had initially targeted this webinar towards our member states from the Africa region, as well as tourism boards and the several partners that we work with. But we've been happy to see that we've got a lot of interest from all over the world. So happy to welcome you all once again. I would like to start by introducing the panel. I'm Elsia Grandcourt, Director of the Africa Department at the UNWTO. And as your host today, I am joined here by my dear colleague, Director of Communications, Marcelo Risi. So welcome to you all. And on behalf of the Secretary General, Zurab Pololikashvili, I would like to once again reiterate and share his message of solidarity and support to all the countries that have been touched by COVID-19, and also to his commitment and support throughout this unprecedented crisis. Now, the core objective of this session today is, first of all, to share what are the global initiatives that UNWTO has launched since this crisis in terms of communication. But we also have a panel of experts that will be giving us the communications perspective from the Africa region, and also to look at ways at how we can continue to push forward the positive narrative about African continent. So I will start by introducing the panel. Today we have Mr. Kojo Bentum Williams. Kojo is the managing editor and publisher of a leading travel and tourism magazine in Africa, which I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with, Voyage Afrique. And he's also supporting UNWTO's in terms of reaching out to our partners on the ground in Africa. We are also joined by Mrs. Bronwyn Nielsen. She's the CEO and founder of the Nielsen Network, also chair of Garcia Marcel Trust Fund in Media Network, and she's also the former editor-in-chief of CNBC Africa. She has over 20 years of experience in African broadcasting. Bronwyn is also regularly solicited to participate in live debates at events throughout the world. We're also joined by my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Kwachi Donkor. He is the CEO of Africa Tourism Partners in South Africa. And Africa Tourism Partners is also an affiliate member of the UNWTO. Kwachi is as well an experienced and renowned tourism development and destination marketing strategist. And lastly, but not least, Mr. Didier Danchon. He is the former head of a crisis center of the French Home Affairs Ministry, and today vice president of the Amaranth, who is the #1 risk and security firm in Europe. Also bringing a wealth of expertise, but also expertise on the African continent. So just in order to set the tone of our conversation this afternoon, I would let my colleague Marcelo guide us and share with us a little bit what are the initiatives that UNWTO has launched in order for us to communicate effectively throughout this crisis, and then we can engage the debate with our, just to tell our listeners listening in, if you have any questions, you can write to us in the chat. The questions can be addressed to our panel. And if it's on any point that we've not been touched on during the discussion, we will try our best to accommodate and reply to you during this session. If not, we will look at afterwards, once we consolidate the recording, we'll share with you the different points that you may have wanted us to address if we're not able to do so throughout this session. So Marcelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elsia. I confirm my microphone is on, everybody's listening and everybody's watching. Okay, this is the things that you have to ensure always in these situations. All protocols observed. Thank you very much for participating. And we're here really to have a conversation amongst our guests and ourselves, and to listen more to our guests than to ourselves. Basic principle in communications for us is always listen first, see what's out there, and then you see how to react, when to react, if to react. We're very happy to have this particular webinar with a very specific focus on Africa, which is already complex enough. We're very well aware that Africa is not a country. And I need to say this because many times when addressing like global policy and responses and also communications, it's always unjustified in an unjustified and in an almost brutal way, oversimplified. Now, what we've been doing in UNWTO, it's a learning experience for everybody. It's a social experience worldwide, and it's a social experiment for us as well as an organization. From one day to the next, having to work from home, coordinating various teams and the output that we do. And communications is particularly hit by this situation because, of course, we need to be catering what comes out of the organization. Again, fine-tuning listening. What's there? The approach, the umbrella approach that many of you, I'm sure, have seen is travel tomorrow. What does it mean? That's what we want to know. That's what we need to learn. How will we travel tomorrow? We will travel again. We know all the technical approaches in terms of tourism bouncing back, being a people-to-people sector, strong employer, and so on. But we need to find out how it really will be. Really the awareness that tourism not living with its back turned to reality needs also to reset, to reboot on various levels. If you've seen the campaign, we really focus on what we think are really the almost intrinsic values to tourism. We go beyond specific products or expressions associated with tourism, like the experience and so on, but really to fundamental values, which we are certain will also be absolutely relevant and meaningful when we can travel again. We've opened a dedicated landing site on the website dedicated to COVID-19, which has grown beyond what we were expecting, and we're reshuffling this at the moment. We're, of course, catering for all the technical output that's being done in terms of response measures and recovery recommendations by our member states and beyond, and sharing this and on all areas, from marketing and promotion. Now we're issuing, since yesterday, we have it also recommendations for vulnerable public populations and communities. We're having a package on technical cooperation, which we're going to promote. We're, of course, having the calls for strong political backing beyond words. You might have seen a statement by our Secretary General along these lines. We know that trust is much more than a word, and that trust will be a very concrete and tangible asset in the times to come. And this is why communications is so important. Admitting that there are many question marks, that of course we're confronted almost on a daily basis with questions of when will this end, what will happen, when will we go back to normal. As an article in last week's Economist says, we're probably going back to upper normal, because it's going to be a totally new situation. And this is where communications comes in, because we also have to rethink how we convey the tourism message, how we convey the tourism for development message, how we keep on pushing, in this case, Brand Africa. As you know, we've been working on this over the past year. We've released a 10-point plan approved by a General Assembly last September, but we will need to adapt all of this. So this is the overall framework. We can go back to this if relevant, if needed, if requested, both by our guests and by our viewers and users. And we make a quick round of kickoff questions and giving the floor to all our participants and letting them engage amongst themselves. And I would like to start with Bronwyn Nielsen, who was just introduced by Elsia. We really treasure her participation and dedicating her time and knowledge and experience to this. We talked about building trust. We know the relevance of tourism. Now, and really out of curiosity, and I want to learn from you, when tourism has come to a standstill, also in Africa, to a huge extent, what's the tourism story to tell? You as a professional journalist with vast experience and communicator, what can we tell our tourism audience? What's the tourism story when tourism has come to a standstill? What's your opinion? Thank you.
Marcello, thank you very much. And thank you to Elsia. It's great to be here discussing this very important topic. There is a marvelous digital move that is happening to unlocking tourism opportunities that we are noticing here in Africa. And I'm going to go to a tangible example, that is wildearthtv.com. They have been in the wildlife broadcasting environment for many, many years, but they're offering over this time where obviously we can't leave our homes, we're in lockdown, is to take viewers across the world. This is as far as Antarctica, France, Switzerland. You really are seeing questions coming from India and other emerging markets, including the African continent. They take viewers on a virtual game drive live for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. And they are still promoting the context of tourism and what we have here in Africa. They also have a placement not only in South Africa, but in Kenya as well, in the Mara. So they move very, very clearly between Kenya and the wildlife and the lodges in that space into what we have in South Africa. And I really think that that is one way of making sure we still showcase what we have from a tourism sector here in South Africa. I know a number of other lodges are also following suit and bringing their own digital displays to the virtual environment. I think I'll stop there and get my colleagues to come in.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very generous approach to managing time, and also, I think, setting the pace for the other ones. So stick to your talking. Don't talk so much. I'm talking too much, probably. But having really continuing with what just Bronwyn said, of course, virtual game drive, keeping tourism destinations literally visually alive for when we come back. I would pass on the microphone, the camera to Kojo Benton Williams, and who many of you know, and he's like a go-between what we do at UNWTO and the real world outside. So we're the boring bureaucrats in Madrid, but he works really in the field of bridging this, communicating tourism, but really making it relevant. How do you make then this tourism story, which was just referred to, the Bronwyn, for instance, the virtual game drive, Kojo, how do you make it relevant to your audience? How do you engage them at a time where, like, the worries probably are not necessarily focused on that? They're focused on really how do we really deal with all this mess caused by this virus, you know, the economic ripple effects, the development challenges that are coming entailed by it, and so on. Kojo, what's your take on this?
Thank you, Marcelo, and thanks for the opportunity to join this webinar. I think that, just like Bronwyn said, it's a time that you can use the digital tools to be able to reach a bigger audience, because remember, everybody's at home and you get the attention of people. Having said that, we, as you know, we are very specialized media. We are the popular media. So what happens is that we go back to communicate exactly what we've been doing already, you know, even much more intense in terms of what we are putting out there. But also there's a thin line between trying to give the visual picture and then how you believe that you have to be sensitive, okay, compassionate, and all of that. So once you are showing things like the attractions, the destination, which is, I mean, the only way that you can be able to reach your audience, you are also able to pick up the narrative, because narrative is very important. And I believe that at this point, what we do is that, yes, we get the visuals out there, but we are able to seep out the narrative of the particular attraction. So for example, what UNWTO put out from the first global meeting and all of that was that we took it, okay, and then we're able to communicate well with our followers and members. Because then we are very specialized media with tourism, aviation, and all of that. We don't just go and pick something and then show it to the people. We were very particular about how destination, for example, when the things happen, people became compassionate, you know, they showed empathy. And so that line between aggressively putting things out there and then also knowing when is the right time is very key and it's very important. The reason that I believe some of the African member states were doing well and they kept informing people, but also not aggressive in terms of what you have to show people, but you were able to use this period that we call a cooling period, if you like, to be able to still communicate key things that is missing, because we know that we are all running around, but the coronavirus has taught us that everybody is on rock bottom, and then you have the attention of many people. But as we are not a popular media, we concentrate on the travel community, the key players, the tourism board, and by so doing, we are able to bring them what they are missing from the general news.
Thank you, Kojo. Now, of course, we go from like an international organization like the World Tourism Organization. Bronwyn mentioned of course, the digital world as a vehicle to keep the conversation going. With each participant, we're sinking it one level deeper into reality. Of course, you, Kojo, talk to mainly tourism targets as your consumers. Now, we still need to promote, and we still need to tell the world that we're out there. This is part of the job, of course, of someone like Africa Tourism Partners, and that would be my next question to Kwakye Donkor. As marketing experts, really, how can you really adapt messaging, promoting tourism in these incredibly unparalleled times, where we know that really a hard tourism sell is not only insensitive, but really impossible because all the markets are under lockdown. How do you go about this? How do you balance this? Is he online? Kojo, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Right. No, thank you very much. And thank you, Bronwyn, Kojo, Elsia, all those who've spoken before me. I think we all understand that there is a reality that we've never faced before. And the reality we have never faced before is the COVID that we all know. It's a common knowledge, tourism is the hardest hit. The way I see it is that I see the current scenario, I see the whole COVID situation in three situations. What I call the now that everyone is calling the new normal. We may also call it the enhanced normal that we are going to face. And at this very moment, as Kojo and my previous panelists spoke about, this is not a time for hard sell. It's a time for building social capital with our communities. It's a time of believing in sustainability. If you look at all what is happening, every country around the world is now focused on containment. So I believe, and this is I think the third panel that I sat on, I'm saying the same thing. We have to work with the leaders of the world to make sure that we preach the message of containment. And we can do it in different ways. I think UNWTO has done an excellent job by showing leadership and starting the message that everyone should stay at home and stay tomorrow. Different countries have adapted it, and they've adapted it very well. I'll give you an example. South Africa is one of the first African countries that came out with a campaign to tell people they should stay at home and travel tomorrow. It's based on the basic principle that when you have life, you have everything. And that social capital, that bond, working with our communities to make sure they understand the challenges that are there and basically prepare themselves to be able to travel and experience how well tomorrow is the message that has to be going out and not the hardcore sell. Now, tourism perspective, we can still sell tourism in a very humble, respectful, sensitive way. If you look at what South Africa did, they basically tell people, stay at home. There is a whole world out there. There are new places that you never explore. Here are some of the places. While you stay at home, try and interact virtually, digitally, in whatever form that you can to keep yourself busy to engage. Another country that has done a similar program is Ghana. Ghana has launched a campaign, Stay at Home and Know Ghana, which is a very, very clever move, because what they are trying to do is people should, while they're at home, try to interact with the culture, the heritage, the arts, the cuisine, to understand. And naturally, domestic tourism has not been something that we've all been pushing. So getting those messages and getting people to understand their culture, their heritage, and interacting with their families around these issues are extremely critical, on top of the health containment messages. Another country that has done very well, that we might not, when I would like everyone to go and see it. One is Mexico. It's talking about sustainability. How do we come in touch with nature at this time? It teaches us to be hygienic. It teaches us to take care of the environment. It teaches us to do a whole lot of things. And the other one is about togetherness, which is also driven by Singapore, which they've got about 90 voices singing together, trying to work with each other to make sure. So there are different ways we can still talk about tourism, but not pushing. So for every marketer out there, my advice is please hold back on your paid advertising and rather build a social capital and the relationship going forward, because you need the same people when we come back to normality or the new normal. Thank you.
The new normal, yes. Thank you. Yeah, one of our participants just said, "Don't be tone deaf to what's going on out there in reality." I think this is what we're saying. I think social capital and believing in sustainability, yes, is key. I'm wondering, and maybe we pick up this question in the second round, but just to plant the seed, I'm wondering if many players within the tourism sector are now really becoming aware of really the muscle of tourism and the role that tourism can play beyond tourism. As a social conveyor, you mentioned again, building social capital, I think is interesting and is very relevant and important. And that really tourism feels really honestly and deeply as part of the larger society, and not as an exception, not as the pull-out section on the Sunday paper and so on. I mentioned trust at the beginning, and I think trust is, again, will be something, talking about hard elements, more than just a word or a marketing label, but will be really a strong asset in the world to come. Many are talking about, for instance, like the health passport, something that really contributes to regaining confidence, both from the consumer side for the tourists, but also for the authorities, for investors, and to keep all of this huge machinery going and to really contribute the way it can. Not our last, because we'll keep on circling now, but of course, Didier Rachon, he was introduced at the beginning. He's the VP for Institutional Affairs, at Amarant International. Now, thinking about security in the context of trust, of course, because they are very close relatives. And looking ahead, because we see that the pandemic started local, became global, and at varying speeds and degrees. And probably the de-escalation might follow a same pattern, right? Many countries who've surpassed the peak might open again, and so on, there might be some lessons learned. So looking ahead, in these uncertain times, of course, once travel restrictions are really starting to become really easier, what kind of measures really across the whole tourism value chain, and of course, especially the health related, those ones really relating to trust and confidence, do you foresee as an expert, as a security expert? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of you. And you know, maybe my name give me a bit and I'd like to start talking about treasure right. Maybe to start by the Chinese word. It's a kind of theory, you know. This is supposed to come from China, and Chinese word for the description of crisis is a mix of danger in one hand and opportunity on the other hand. And I would like to put the emphasis on this point. Not only finding, there's also means a lot of expectation of hope behind this. Crisis and data, by far, in crisis management and maybe security. I to underline maybe the two main quality ability that everyone must have facing a crisis. And those two words and are very, very, very simple to describe. The first one is in all the crisis, especially in this one. You see the people, we don't know too much. Does it come?
Didier, sorry to jump in. I think we're having problems with the connection. Yes. Désolé. I don't know if, and I'm getting messages, and I put on my AirPods. Just, I wasn't trusting my own hearing, but I see others said, well, maybe we can try and have another go at it.
Sure.
At times it's a technical thing, you have to go out and join us again. And sometimes it's as simple as that in this world, but let's give it another try. You and I got interrupted when you mentioned this balancing act, as you said, right? Like pros and cons, the good and the bad, and maybe also the ugly. But if we can take it from there again, thank you.
Okay, now it's a bit up.
Yes, keep going.
Yeah.
Let's see if it works. If not, we'll make another round.
Yeah, it's better. It's maybe better now. Yes, I just would like to underline the two quality for me that we have to definitely give on board for us. The first one, as I said, is humility, and to be able to face and the rest and about the crisis at the end of it. And that we have definitely in a situation of creative, in a situation of imagination. So for me, yeah, good.
We're having feedback. We're having some feedback, and it's breaking up. Maybe you might try to log out and join us again. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I think it's for the benefit of everybody, our listeners first and foremost, and of course the debate. And we will not discuss your question. This is still yours to answer.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you. But going back, I'm sorry. While Didier manages technology and gets hold of it, this gives you, by the way, of course, the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. All these debates going on at the moment, and also in our fields of like visibility, communication, promotion, we're dealing with an unprecedented challenge which is hitting the world, and yet we have problems, of course, at the same time as doing something apparently as simple as a video conference. So this gives you just the proportion of things. I would like to go back to my connecting question of thought before, and and really to our really generous Bronwyn Nielsen, who spoke so briefly but so concretely. Now, do you think really that there is sort of a new awareness within the tourism sector that it really carries a social responsibility beyond the marketing headlines? Because everybody has a social responsibility. We know that everybody can relate to a larger or lesser extent to the Sustainable Development Goals and really to the greater good. But now, pushed on by COVID, is there a new awareness of the social responsibility of tourism? Can you say this?
So Marcello, I really like what Kwachi was mentioning around Ghana and getting to understand the Ghanaian environment and utilizing this opportunity during lockdown to make that connectivity in terms of each country. But I do think I want to go back to the issue of not being tone deaf. And as we all know, we all have a social responsibility, but I think that we've got to look at the smaller players, which comprise the tourism industry, especially across Brand Africa. And I think the questions they're asking themselves right now is how to sustain themselves. So it's beyond marketing. It's just how do we actually sustain ourselves with no revenue over the lockdown periods, with the uncertainty that prevails. We all in different countries with different rules and regulations. We have no idea, many of us, how long our lockdowns are going to go on for. And I think that is something that right now we can't disregard the urgency of revenue generation or support that is needed to the small SME tourism players out across the African continent. And I'd like to throw that into the conversation as well. Because absolutely, you know, digital marketing is there and you can go on the virtual game drives and you can market your lodges, etc. But whether you can sustain long enough with no revenue coming in is the big question. And there's no commensurate money in the digital environment. So you're not going to be able to charge people while you showcase your lodges. You may, you know what I mean? It comes down to sustainability. So for me, that is a key concern.
Thank you. I think we're also having slight technical interruptions there, but I hear you, of course, in terms of, one of the viewers who asked about being tone deaf or not, she or he might be confirming that we're not tone deaf in this regard. But now my question to you again as a follow-up, for once I'm not the one being asked things. What can the media do in this context? We know about the challenge. We know about the social responsibility. We know we have to go the extra mile or the extra 100 miles probably. But I mean, what's the role of the media? Of course, from the tourism angle, what can we really do? What can be done? What's that extra commitment? Thank you.
So I would love to see, Marcello, media players across the board giving up airtime to tourism, and giving up airtime across the board to Brand Africa, where you mentioned Brand Africa in the early stages of this conversation. The players, I put out that challenge to the BBCs, the Skies of the World, the CNNs, that they need to keep the continent alive from a visibility perspective. And they certainly cannot charge advertising fees at this time. So for me, that would be one big ask in this regard. I was chatting to one of the CEOs yesterday, a key CEO, Adrian Gore, the CEO of Discovery, not in the tourism industry, but he made a very, very important point, because he was saying that we are seeing a huge shift in the world. We actually now are convinced that the world can change. Whatever prevails, we know that we're in for enormous change. And that change can actually be for the better. And I think the media has a huge role in playing that, not only for the tourism industry, but also to fight the fight against fake news. The CEO that I was chatting to said, what we will see is that the new heroes of the new normal that we are referring to, is there will be the scientists and the doctors on the front line, and that we have the opportunity for facts to really trump fake news. And that's our role, whether it comes to the tourism industry or to the broader media environment, is that we can get back to reality.
Me unmute. I don't know if Didier managed to come back. If we have
I
him
hope
with us,
so. Can you
I
hear
see
me?
him. Oh, I see you, and I see you have headsets. So let's the floor
Let's hope
and
that
the
it
virtual
works.
floor. Yes, so far so good.
Yeah.
So just share your
Yeah,
thoughts. Dive in. Thank you.
maybe Bronwyn gave me the opportunity maybe to jump on her speech, and when we said about transparency, when we talk about clarity, I think that this is exactly one point, very important point of my explanation. When I said about humility, and I would like to add, link directly to Bronwyn, lucidity. You know, we have to face the figure, okay, and consider, and I will be a little bit provocative. I'm sorry for that, but consider the fact that today in Europe, there's 1 million of sick people, ill people, and more than 100,000 deaths. It's compared to the North America, 100,000 sick people, and about more than 40,000 deaths. If we go to Africa, it's to 22,000 sick people, only 1,000 deaths. It's too much. Okay, definitely yes. But if you allow me, it's mainly the crisis, the health crisis is mainly an issue for northern people, for the unbound people. The point is, the health crisis today is an history written by the North. We just have to put the attention and to underline that the consequence of this health crisis coming to Africa won't be a social and security crisis. If you see what I mean, for us today, considering Africa again, we have to face the reality. The reality is not the health issue, is the social issues. The lack and the disparition of work, the nightmare of closing all the installation to resume installation, restaurants, hotel, travel agency. This is what's going to happen today or tomorrow in Africa. And this is what we have to face. And to be very honest, today in Africa, the crisis must be managed by, let's say again, concrete measure, definitely, for operators, for professionals. Am I clear?
Yes, thank you. In spite of still technical coming out, but I think we were able to hear you. I think it's a very interesting point, certainly a provocative one, but I think a very true one when we see that, of course, there is no such thing as a cut and paste policy. You have confinement in the north, and this is not applicable everywhere. It's like
Absolutely.
the old economic
Absolutely.
Reform policy,
Absolutely.
the Washington consensus, the trickle down doesn't work anywhere, if at all, and so on. That's very true. But at the same time, of course, if the markets, the international tourism consumer markets for Africa are under lockdown, of course, there's a lifeline which has been cut
For sure.
on so many levels. Look at, I don't know, look at remittances from migrants, look at foreign direct investment, look at tendencies really to stay home, which is a safe option, but it's also many times a political option. You know, this can give the pretext for other directions that.
And you're absolutely right. And this is a time now to make proposition and to suggest for the professional at the end of a chain on the ground, what can be the measure that they have to deploy and to regain this trust from the outbound sector. You see what I mean?
I see. Yes, sorry.
Just on the point that you mentioned, Didier, because you did rightly say that the crisis is more on the north. as in Africa, we haven't seen that much of an impact on the health system as yet.
Health, yes.
On the social and economic part, it's there. And you know, because you deal in that space, that Africa, and as we all know, we've got our fair share of challenges that we've been through in terms of crises. And there are different protocols that have to be put in place, as we see today when we go to Africa, especially in accessing the hospitality areas. There are certain checks that are being done. How do you foresee now that this will not become as an added burden as we look to introduce other measures, such as health measures, for example, to ensure that still we want to get it right, but also to communicate correctly that the right protocols are being set in place in regards to welcoming tourists back to our shores when it's safe to do so?
Yeah, and again, it's easier to say, but more difficult to put in place, of course, okay? But from my perspective, there's three levels of answers, three levels of response that we can definitely propose. And for all our friends who are listeners to this conference, maybe three kinds of options for them at different levels. From my perspective, and again, I'm not a doctor at all, I'm not a specialist in management of health, but maybe just the management of crisis, and maybe to anticipate and to mitigate the consequence of a security crisis. For me, the first step that we have to consider is definitely the trainings of people. We must put the emphasis on the trainings of all the people supposed to welcome the tourists when the end of containment will come. We have to prepare and to train all the people in restaurants, in the transportation agency, in the hotels. Are they going to manage people coming again from the north to their country and to their let's say restaurant or organization, local organization? Are they going to manage them? So we have to train the local people. We have to give them, again, the barrier gestures, all the barrier gestures that we have to assume today in Europe, in the north. We have to train the people in Africa to make it and to use it like a kind of reflex, you see? And when I'm talking about barrier gestures, I'm talking about the mask, talking about the gloves, talking about the separation between making any kind of food or that kind of things. We have to train the people to use that kind of things. You know, we have to deploy means and equipments for sure. And this is the time for. This is the time now, and not to follow the bad example of the country. You know, once again, we are only friends around the table today, so it's easy for me as a French to say that it's a nightmare. And why? Why? In France, we don't have any kind of mask, we don't have gloves and so on. This is time for Africa to buy it. Again, it's coming from China. Let's go and buy gloves and masks to China today, because the tourists will come again and they will expect to face their receptor, the inbound tourists, with the mask and the gloves. They're expecting this for sure. So the last point for me at the first level is communication. We have to explain to the professional in the north that the local tourist operators are ready. They train their people, they equip their people, they are ready to welcome again all the tourists. Don't hesitate to come to our place. We are ready. We train the people, we clean everything, so we are ready. And we bought all the masks that we need. Communication. Again, you know, from Europe, and I speak under your control, you're in Madrid base. Africa is a kind of black hole. We don't know. We're just afraid of what's going to be the situation tomorrow. But the situation tomorrow is going to be a nightmare regarding the social and the security consequence of the crisis, more than the health. Definitely, the figures are here, you know. So I don't want to be too long, but this is for me the first level of measure that we have to consider and to definitely don't lose time to put in place. And there's two more level, but I will maybe describe later. It's up to you. Let me know.
Thank you. Thank you. Of course, when we lay out this map, we see this as a sequence, but I think this requires immediate action on so many fronts, because if we're talking about training, for instance, and getting means and equipment, we're talking about resources, we're talking about the medium, at least the medium term. But many do not have the luxury of being able to plan in the medium, let alone the long term. But I'm provoking you again to, do you hear me?
Yeah,
No,
I hear you.
okay.
But let me answer to you. Let me answer to your point, you know. And let me give you a proposition. Why do we have in Africa to buy masks in China? Why are we not able to make it? Are we not able to make it? And I'm not talking only about technical or something very sophisticated. I'm talking about tissues mask. Today in France, this is what we are doing. And don't tell me that in Africa, we don't have any kind of people who are not able to make and immediately, and to work even in the streets, you know, and to give them for all the population. Don't waste time.
I hear you. Yes.
To expect from China. That's my point.
No, I hear you, and we're getting many messages in the feed here that there are actually, of course, masks being made in various countries of Africa, because I want to avoid again falling about the generalization. We're talking about 50+ countries, and we need to, of course, portray them. They're unified within the diversity, and I think this is one of the great strengths of Africa. Still, we need to come back to the subject. Thank you, Jamal, who just threw that comment in. But this is part of this is the problem of the challenge of communications. It's cross-cutting, so we can touch on many things. And this is why I wanted again give the word to Kwaku Donkor. Again, we're talking about this immediate challenge to keep the conversation going. Of course, in the long haul, as resistance runners, long haul marathon runners of tourism, we need to think about the training. We need to think about the hardware. Also, we need to think about probably domestic markets. This, of course, also clearly shows when there is over dependency, maybe relying on external forces, and also the much needed. And I know this is we know that this is an ongoing conversation, and there is awareness on strengthening sub-regional and domestic markets. Again, from a marketing tourism perspective, how do we deal really in the short term? In the long term, we can talk about education. Everybody will agree, and providing more hardware. What we just heard from Didier so eloquently. But the here and now, people asking for solutions really in the coming week and months to come, so that really not everything really falls to the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I just want to comment on Didier's views before I get to the point quickly. First of all, I want to correct the point that a lot of things are happening in Africa. In terms of resources to contain, there's a lot that is being done in terms of marks, 3D designs, and all sort of things happening in Africa. And I will tell you that the supply from China were cut off when the emergency occurred, and Africans are making effort to make sure we turn manufacturing equipment and a lot of things to make sure we produce a lot of things from here. And the positive news is that is going to change the way we operate over dependence on other countries to survive. The second point, in terms of important resources and stuff, I think Bronwyn spoke about it eloquently, saying that what we are focusing on is now. If the person doesn't have money to put food on the table, why are we worried about resources tomorrow? So what the governments have been doing, which maybe Didier and a couple of our participants are not aware, South Africa, once again, is one of the first to do it. There is an emergency fund in place to make sure that people at least are able to survive within the immediate term. The processes is what matters. So my recommendation is we have all these emergency solutions that have been put in place. And we had a discussion at AU level, I think about 3 days ago in a closed meeting. Is make sure that we communicate very well for people to understand exactly how they can access these resources that have been made available now, to streamline the process, to make it easier and not become bureaucratic as has happened in a lot of time when people need to access resources from government. So the messaging needs to be going to around how do we help people to assist people in our communities to be able to access the emergency relief funds in various countries that are readily available. Another important point I would like to raise, we are talking of training and all these things, and I've been talking this since the beginning of this thing. The SMME, ordinary person having a BNB, Joseph BNB, sitting in Timbuktu, doesn't have money to buy food. How do we expect the person to get on virtual training? Let's ask that question. So Brown, your campaign is not just the media giving stuff for free. In South Africa, I said it in one of my meetings last month, we said data must fall. Where are the telecommunication companies? They are the biggest winners in this situation. Every single person is consuming telecommunication services. So my request is that, and possibly Marcelo, from yourself, sitting at the UNWTO, how do we encourage, particularly Africa, the big players? How do we collaborate with them? All the telecommunication companies come on board. How much data can they donate to the society to be able to speak to their loved ones, to be able to communicate to the future market, to be able to get around the messages that they want to communicate out there? Where are they in this situation? And data is one of the most expensive. And I'm saying it here, data is life now as we speak. Without data, you don't have life. So it's not only the media, we need them to come on board. Without these fundamentals, the marketing is not going to happen. The training that Didier spoke about,
Thank you.
is not the kind of training that we need now for the North. We need training for ourselves because the North is cut off. People are dying. The immediate solution is domestic tourism. And that is why I refer to what Ghana did, what South Africa has done. We want people to be, because where is the money for people to travel long distances anyway? So it's the time for us to start exposing people to what is right at our backyard that we've never had a chance. Something that I can go and sleep overnight or drive there and come back, domestic tourism. And the next level, intra-Africa tourism. How do we? Now, the intra-Africa tourism become the issue of flight, become the issue of visa. So we are talking at this level about domestic tourism. But then what we require from UNW to our policymakers to get quickly together and have policies or advocate for our airlines to work together. For the taxes on airline, we don't have to wait until the borders are open before we look at those things. Policymakers need to look at it now. AU, our policymakers, our leaders, our principals, that is what they should be talking about now. Africa is very lucky. We now have Africa Continental Free Trade Area. This is an opportunity to leverage. So while we are at the ground level as full stages and doing all the work, we expect our policymakers to be looking at these things. Free movement of people, there are protocols around it. They've never been implemented. So those are the things that we should be looking into at that level. And we at the bottom should be focusing on building the social capital, making sure that our people understand how they can get the resources. And the government that have not put emergency fund, rich fund, we know there are priorities. But if you want to resuscitate our economies, tourism must come first, everything will follow. In countries where tourism is not at the center or at the dinner table, the emergency fund will not even reach these SMMEs that we are talking about. And I believe that is the conversation that we should have. We should have 3 levels of conversation. One at the policy level. South Africa Airways is gone. Mauritius Airways went yesterday. We don't know how many of them are going to die. Have we even ever thought of a Pan-African airline, putting our resources and having it together? Is that conversation taking place now? So from UNWTO level, those are the issues that I possibly would like to be escalated to, not just ministerial, presidential level, for our presidents to be talking about this. Then we, at this level, advocate for the telecommunication, the media guys to come on board. And right at the local level, we provide support, the art of kindness, the kind of support, humanity. That is where sustainability comes in. It's about the people, it's about the planet, it's about the environment, about their prosperity. We can do the little that we can to support our communities. And that is those are the things I would about. Thank you.
No, I agree. And for social capital is the first of the bullet points of the takeaways I'm writing down for us. So it is literally well noted, your point. So maybe Kojo, you've been silent for far too long, and you're such a good speaker. But I think there's your tourism story right now, because I've never been quite a friend that you need to talk about tourism to talk about tourism, right? You're portraying people, you're portraying different places. As I said, Africa is 50 plus countries united in the diversity. And as we just heard, there are things already happening on the ground. There are effectively masks being built and manufactured, and there are different responses on the ground. We mentioned Ghana, we mentioned South Africa with all the challenges. So Kojo, for me, if I put myself outside of the tourism bubble, this to me is a tourism story. I don't need to necessarily to read about a destination to become aware of that there might be an interesting place to visit. So is that a tourism story for you, for your media outlets and your partners, Kojo?
Thank you, Marcelo. Let me touch on the point that DJ said, and I respectfully, I'd like to say that the issue of a social issue, obviously, it's across there where we have paycheck to paycheck, the same thing in Africa. So, I mean, I don't think that we need to look at the theories and the conspiracy theories, and we don't want to go there. I just want to zoom in the communication part of it. So the tourism stories, like you're saying, we've been focusing on this. Now, our story is that, okay, we've had a lot of webinars as well, and you get the feedback that people are now coming to ground zero. Our authorities, okay, our managers of the tourism have now seen the deficit that we had. People have had knee-jerk, project, they put different things together. We had a Yamoussoukro Convention and all of that. These are all not working. So when we are back to the level that COVID had not just exposed all of that industry, but the tourism industry that we so much glorify, is it worth our, the over glorification when we know that policymakers and things that they ought to do are not being done? So example, look at the Africa Without Borders that we also continue to champion. Just like Kwachi said, you come to a point that you cannot just say that Africa Without Borders, we have to travel intra-Africa, and then the basic thing of having a flight to go is so expensive. Okay, it's 3 times the price that you want to leave from here to London or something. So you have key things, and our focus on the story is the fact that yes, we're going through a very challenging times, but the other thing that I believe DMOs, tourism board, ministries can do is to use this time to create advocacy, okay? Because we cannot just be sitting there and just like you and the BTO said, recovery has to be better. You cannot be there and then we are back to new normal. So if the tourism boards, the Ministry of Transport, the Foreign Affairs, all the other agencies are not communicating and are not pushing something that would ensure that when we come back, we are able to do tourism seamlessly, I'm sorry, we'll be just writing the stories and it will be just a ticking point. Then the last point I would like to touch on is also the issue that, like I said, the main thing about managing communication is to look at how destinations can use this opportunity to also educate its base. Okay, so typically people have, safari, cultural, and a lot of products that they can sell. but some of them are not so clear. So you see things that are put out there, and the message that you are seeing, stay home, travel tomorrow, some of them post that stay home, travel tomorrow are incoherent. So you cannot use that. You know, you pick that and then you zoom into the local situation and you realize that the board is not even talking to the SMEs or is not inviting or eliciting ideas that they can use to make tourism better. So my story is that tourism will bounce back, but if we are not using the chance to communicate, to bring people together, to see how we can begin the process of saying Africa without borders, okay, we can have cheap flights. And bear in mind that the airlines, like you said, are going down. And on the base of all the things you are saying is the political will. So I'm happy that you are scaling up the conversation with tomorrow you're having a G20 meeting with tourism ministers and all of that. And these are things that I believe that our government should come back and make tourism a key economic driver. If tourism is a key economic driver, it's not just an industry, it's a pro-poor. And that's the story that we can be able to tell, and people will know that if you invest in tourism and we are back again, we won't take knee-jerk reactions, you know, in dealing with the problem, and then we go back to the same old thing. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you, Kojo. Before I pass on the word now to Bronwyn again, and you said 2-3 clear things which I like to keep in everybody's. And this is the connecting question. Before that, we heard the necessity to really to scale this conversation up, to raise the awareness and to mobilize action, really from the helm of the governments. Of course, with the support of the tourism ministries and responsible entities, but this needs to really be more than lip service to the relevance of tourism, because it's easy to talk about the blessings of tourism when the times are good. Right? When the going gets rough, this is when you really need to show your true colors. Now, you mentioned the G20 happening tomorrow. Kojo, we also had today a meeting of the EU Commission, the European Union. A few days ago, the Commissioner for the Interior, sort of the Minister for the Interior of the EU, pledged that up to 25% of the rescue package in Europe, I underscore Europe, the North, but should be devoted to tourism. That's a lot of money. And this is a recognition that the sector so far, in this explicit way, had not experienced. So there is a political momentum, we sense, to really scale up this calls for action and for true solidarity. If you look at the latest statement also by the UNWTO Secretary General, by Zurab Polonikashvili, he said, okay, words are good, but action needs to follow. So really walk the talk. Now, Bronwyn, when we really talk how to really airtime, free airtime, this is my second talking point, by the way. Okay, so I have social capital, I have airtime for tourism, I have tone deaf and trust, and then many more. But if you really want to get not only give the free airtime, but also fill up maybe this free airtime with the true political support from the top to get all this going, because I think everybody agrees on what's been discussed here. How do we do it?
So, Marcelo, I actually want to take that free airtime. I've devised an advertising campaign for UNWTO and domestic tourism while we've been in session. And what I need, and I want to pick up on both what Kojo and Kwache have said, that is that we've got to be aware that intra-Africa travel is going to be difficult. Kwache mentions Air Mauritius, South African Airways. This could be the plight of many African airline carriers. So if we go with the low-hanging fruit, which is the domestic tourism that Kwache was driving home, I'm saying now, let's go to your national TV broadcasters in country. So let's move one tier below CNN, Sky, BBC. Let's get Kenya Television, Nigeria Television, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, Uganda Television. Each country should dedicate airtime to the tourism industry by promoting domestic tourism. But I'm going to take it one step further, because we need sustainable revenue. And I'm going to say, let's use a pay it forward mechanism. Let's get domestic television channels to work with the political environments to promote domestic tourism in country, book your holiday for tomorrow, pay now. Book your holiday for 2021, pay now, and go domestic. For me, that is a tangible solution, and it plugs the short-term gap of having no revenue in this interim period when we don't know how long the lockdown is going to persevere. There's one other point I want to make, and that is that's my short-term solution. My medium-term solution goes to the intra-Africa tourism. And I agree with, again, what Kwachi was saying with the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. This crisis needs to facilitate and fast track Africa passports so that we have the free movement of goods and people across the African continent with absolute urgency. So that would be my medium-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Going back to Didier, do you see, is there and you as a Frenchman, maybe that's easier for you to give an opinion then. All of this sounds very convincing. Nobody would disagree. Now, it requires, of course, political backing. It requires that the wheels of the really domestic policy, national sovereignty, and so on, that they coincide. We're talking nonetheless really free movements within a continent, right? Visa and so on, and sharing. It goes back to the idea of solidarity. Of course, if I'm well off, my neighbor might also be well off. Now, this sounds it's okay on a webinar, it's okay on paper, but what about the ugly truth of daily politics? Do you see this as a moment? Is COVID so strong that it will get the politics moving in the direction that would be desirable?
For sure. I think this is more than the good time for that, for Africa to prove that they don't need only the people coming from North. This is the good time for Africa to use this intra movement, the intra-tourism, for sure. There's no doubt about that. Consider the point that 80% of the European tourists travel in Europe. It is only 46% in Africa. So that means at the end of the day, we have a huge room to welcome the Africans in Africa. This is the first point. But again, this is a time for politics, for African politics, to consider that their industry of tourism, their local industry of tourism is ready, is professional enough, is ready to be trusted. And to be trusted, that means, again, highest level of professionalism, trainings, highest level of equipments, and as said already, to be prepared. And again, the communication is a key for me because, again, it's very important to know from Europe, but especially from Africa to another country of Africa, that today, in some place, there's no risk, no health crisis. First point. Secondly, that we are ready to welcome the travelers and to welcome the tourists, and with the support, the total support of the politics. And this is a role for me for UNWTO. You know, we can maybe expect from the UNWTO to encourage and to support this action to, let's say, let's dream about opening the borders, facilitating the transport and the travel. The visas is definitely a good idea, okay? But at the end of the day, again, safety, security, professionalism, we are ready. And of course, there's a lot of people, a lot of goodwill ready to help and to support, you know? And this is a point that we already discussed with Elsia and her team at the UNWTO, that a label from UNWTO dedicated to local operators, local Africans operators, professional of tourism, considering that they are at the good level to welcome and to be in the better position to welcome the travelers and the tourists. This is the time for that. I think there's a room for that to definitely increase or improve the level of the quality for the welcome of the people. Definitely, for sure.
Marcelo, just looking at the chats, I think there's a few questions coming in, maybe from a communication side. Bronwyn touched on it, on the different promotions that can be done, but there are some countries that are saying that they've not necessarily been hit by this pandemic in the sense of having cases, but how do they communicate to their partners that, you know, they have not received that many cases, but they are still safe as a destination. So how would you package that in a communications way? Bronwyn, maybe you can help us with that?
So, Elsie, I think that's a very, very difficult question, because it comes back to the point that Didier was introducing, and that is, can we trust the reality on the ground? There are so many issues up in the air at the moment as to whether testing is actually happening in the countries that are saying that they don't have any cases. So I don't have an easy answer on that one. I just do think that the reality is that people are nervous, and I'm not sure how you overcome that and say, look, we're a COVID-free environment. I know, for instance, the last time I checked, Lesotho is COVID-free. It's claiming to be COVID-free. But again, you know, it's surrounded by countries that are experiencing COVID. It's not an easy one, and I'm afraid I would be lying if I said I had a solution here.
I think this is also maybe a. Oh, sorry. Yes, please.
No. I think it's whether the country is facing COVID or not. I think we said it at the beginning. This is global pandemic, and we got to be seen to have solidarity. We got to be seen togetherness, and so if a country doesn't still have it, this is the time for them to support and work with those who have, and possibly work with them to make sure that we can work together as Africans. That is one. Two, this is the time for them to put measures in place. Before this thing spread, I spoke on BBC, and my comment is the same, putting for inter-Africa and domestic. But there was one comment I got wrong. I said a couple of countries haven't been affected. So maybe we should put our energy on those countries. I was wrong. So not having it now doesn't mean, I will call them the late adopters. And African have been late adopters in this scenario. That country should rather take an opportunity to prepare themselves, to prepare their people on the ground, and to educate them in case it happens. And then they have to obviously have solidarity with the rest, and they can still look at sustainability issues about supporting the rest of the world or Africa that has been affected. I just wanted to make that intervention.
And Marcella, I need to come in as well, just very, very quickly, because I've seen a lot of the questions coming through from the audience are saying, great idea on domestic tourism, the pay now and travel later. And a lot of people saying, but the economic reality is that people are waiting for UIF. They don't have money in hand right now. So let's take it one step further. Can we not heavily discount domestic tourism so that you're seeing the money flowing in now, but there's an incentive for people to pay it forward because of the substantial discounts? Look, we're going to have to try something. We can't just give up and say, well, there's no money, so let's not even promote domestic tourism. We have to find a solution. And for me, it's finding the middle ground between a struggling, broader economic environment and an industry that needs to survive in the short term. So we're going to have to box very cleverly, but point well taken, that money is not widely available at the moment.
I mean, what's clear is that this is going to be, give me just a second, Kojo, and then back to you, absolutely. That this needs, of course, not really public-public collaboration, cooperation, public-private as well. And again, I think an opportunity for tourism to show that this is really an area which can go beyond political colors and divisions and unite across that. I mentioned before the European Union rescue package and hopefully a chunk going into tourism. We don't know if Europe can lead the way in terms of showing this kind of commitment. What would be the comparable move on a Pan-African level? Also to make this kind of public commitment and assistance. Because if we're talking, for instance, of discounts, like we just said, of course, this needs to be get some sort of support, because otherwise the first movers will also maybe be not necessarily the first winners, but maybe also the first losers, right? It has many moving pieces. But back over to you, Kojo, sorry.
No, I wanted to add to what Browning said, that we may have to start the domestic tourism again. But if you go down to the operators and you see people who are taking part in tourism, you realize that a lot of the costs that they encounter, obviously, is from the national government. The reason why yesterday, when the Secretary General spoke on BBC, he was making the point that you actually need government to say that, because all the stimuluses that at least I know have been announced in Africa, apart from South Africa again, you've not had clear-cut policies that is there to support tourism. We heard for airlines, they're saying that even slot fees will be taken, but we don't see, I mean, we've not seen the document yet. So unless you would see government support in terms of real actions, the operators, they don't have budgets. And bear in mind that if you speak to them, they tell you that, listen, this is our markup, and this is how much you pay as operating cost. So like you said, we need to have public-private engagement, but it's also important to make the point that government ultimately is the one that can, that can make the biggest of impact if we really want to move this one forward. And then back to my earlier point that if we come back to managing the crisis or managing the communication part of it, I think that I just want to say that, it's so interlinked. So you realize that you have destinations who now are calling for reliefs, or companies, SMEs, but again, there's no data. So unlike Europe, where you can go to the European Commission or go to America and speak, you have figures that you can put out there, put on the table. So it's a call that Africa would have to, again, to invest in data collection, and having a recovery or restart with wrong data or wrong input means that it's a false start. So my point is that it's so interconnected that for us to see us managing that communication, we should use the opportunity to be engaging the key people and build strong institutions that will be able to aid tourism plan, because tourism always get the least budgets. Globally, we know that even in terms of media coverage, tourism always get the least of the coverage. And what we are doing as Voyage Afrique, and what we continue to do, is that we've told African member states and things that concern Africa to send us sometimes journals, features, that we are able to use that to educate our people. And then you don't keep a wedge between your constituency in terms of tourism and then the general public. Yeah.
Thank you, Kojo. Now back to Kwaku. As Browning would say, how do we take this one step further? And I mean one step further in terms of really getting the political commitment that we need. And how do we maybe, because if one country moves alone, one destination moves alone, of course, this is a welcome example. This is a guinea pig of sorts, and we would need some sort of concerted action, at least on a sub-regional, bilateral, 2 or 3 strong countries moving together and maybe leading the way. Is this fantasy a fantasy construct, or is this something feasible? How would you go about it from your marketing communications perspective?
It's not a fantasy. There is a common saying that if you go alone, you go very fast, but you can't go very far. But when you go with a lot, you're obviously able to go very far. I think what Browning said is spot on, and there are different ways that we could look at. For instance, government is giving a lot of emergency funds around where possible. And I think that is where the private and the public sector could come in. Like associations that are involved could possibly work with government to see if a certain percentage could also be retained to encourage people or to support or to subsidize travel. Now, what you are doing is that you are propping consumption, because and you are paying instead of giving money or the full amount for people to spend on groceries. We all have to adjust. We got to change our lifestyle. But then it could be pre-planned to intervene by making sure that certain amount of money is dedicated to travel. In that case, you are still bringing the money back into the economy. In terms of the continental and working together, I think it's very sad that unfortunately those organizations, one of which that I work for, do not exist. Because if you are going to work together, the policymakers are supposed to work together to want to make sure visa. It's always visa versus security. But I will tell you, before even COVID-19 happened, Africa was the safest part in the world. We talk of Boko Haram and all these things in the world. But do I know when I'm going to be bombed? When I'm in Amsterdam Airport, Amsterdam Airport or Heathrow, or possibly anywhere in Spain? Nobody knew. So I think we got to start advocating with our policymakers to possibly have engagement. Basically, let's put a common proposal. There got to be a tourism and security institution within our countries, working group to look into this visa issue. That is extremely important. The second one, we spoke about it, and I'm still advocating for it. There got to be aviation tourism working group, continuously talking, just basically adding to the point that I'm talking about. And there got to be aviation and immigration, also working group, tourism and immigration. When you get this conversation going, and that's what you said, this is the time. We are all saying the new normal. The new normal is not just for the private sector. It's also for policymakers. Our policies are very retrogressive. When are we going to have progressive policy? This is the opportunity. So those are the things that can be done. The third one that needs to be done. This organization, we may not be able to bring all Africa together. I know the AU is talking about Africa Tourism Organization and stuff, but maybe bilaterally, we could do a lot. Why Ghana, for instance, cannot sign with Nigeria population and try and work together as a start. South Africa with some of the neighboring countries, if the bigger organization doesn't exist, this engagement should be taking place. But at the private sector level, which is very sad, there are too many private sector associations across Africa, but they don't talk to each other. So I think the apex private sector organizations should possibly, this is the time for them to be engaging and say, how do we get our tour operators in South Africa to engage with Kenya to come up with a novel solution that post-COVID-19, this is what we are going to, because the status quo is gone. It's been thrown out of the window.
Yes.
And that collaboration at that level is very important. So those are some of the views. Then more importantly, the training. I saw an image yesterday where in China, people are in the protective suit, travel. So this is where I come back. The training side is extremely critical. And if the travel or the telecoms will come on board, that the virtual training, all these things could start. And I think we could share with the universities, everyone coming on board. This time for collaboration. And if possibly, well, those are my inputs to the question.
Thank you. I want to take these, of course, also as your wrap up contribution, if you want, because we're reaching the 1 hour 30 of the time that we had for this webinar. So of course, I want to give now the word to the others. 1 minute each. Didier, what's the takeaway for our audience today from this? You have 1 minute.
That's a challenge. Thank you very much. But I start. I think that I will jump on the last word of Kwake. They're very important in my mind, and I'm very happy that it's exactly in the line of what we are doing or trying to do with Elsia and our team. We are working about the improvement of the professionalism of the local actors for tourism, and to give them, to help them to have the tools. But maybe to add and to go further, maybe this crisis, this opportunity is for us time to put a lot of pressure on the African authorities in different countries to ask them to consider the tourism as important as it is. You know, from my perspective, I met a lot of ministers of tourism of Africa. Those people are not considering at a good level. They must be considering as important. Those people are very important in the organization of a local business, local economy of a country, a dedicated country. And linked to that, those people must be associated to all the new legislation regarding, for instance, the security, and we are talking about the visas, the international agreement between countries to allow people to travel. This database initiative can be supporting. Definitely, we have to put pressure on the local African authorities to tell them tourism is going to be the key for tomorrow, for the development of Africa. Please help us and consider that we have to support this dimension.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Following the order of my screen, at least. Brownin, please. 1 minute. You can do it.
Thanks very much, Marcello. So for me, I go back to some of the key points that have been made. Public-private partnerships, I think at the domestic level, if we start trying at an Africa level right now, we're going to be hamstrung by too many decision makers. So let's get public-private partnerships going domestically. Let's get domestic communication platforms, working with domestic tourism players, looking at how government hands out to the tourism industry, but still playing with this airtime to promote domestic tourism and a pay now, travel tomorrow, supported by government and private sector.
Thank you. Fantastic. Kojo, the heat's on you. That was 1 minute, not even a minute, I think. So
I know. Okay. So what I'm going to say is, I think that we've said the same things, and if we can invest in data, we can invest in research, and use this time also to be innovative about how we can make things work, because we can't just be here waiting for vaccine. That's for sure. And what we can do as media partners is to be able to use this opportunity to publish, to engage our audience about what is happening on their destinations, so that people get to know just not the periphery, but exactly what's happening in their individual destinations. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you. For me, just this is my word cloud of what I've been listening. So at the center of it, I have social capital. There you go, and trust. But of course, I mean, I'm just randomly mentioning things here. United was stronger than flying solo. We need true political backing, meaningful public-private partnerships. The tourism is not some sort of footnote. It's not a marginal force, but it can hold the key to development. Education and training are key. Visas and agreements, and this is political collaboration, which really goes far beyond tourism, and tourism entities working also with other ministries. We mentioned from aviation to, of course, migration. Data, evidence-based decisions are clear. Domestic, regional, and going further, continental. One thing is missing though. Nothing will work if we're not able to sink it down. If the population doesn't feel co-ownership of the benefits of tourism, which is why we're here, at least in UNWTO, then no matter how much backing we get from the top or support by, I don't know, the African Union, development banks, and so on, if it's not inclusive, then we will have done an incomplete job. Elsia, back to you to wrap it up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcelo. Thank you to all our panelists. I think it has been a very interesting exchange. We've seen the thoughts coming in. We've tried to put in a few questions here and there. But what I can assure our audience is that we're going to compile everything and come back to you with the audio, the recording of this session. And we take note of all the suggestions that has been discussed here, because on our side, I did not go into the details, but there are several platforms that we're also talking together. What Kwachi mentioned with the AU, we attended the meeting as well, and we exchanged and shared. So it's a collective effort. I won't go again on the points because Marcelo captured majority of the points that was discussed today. We see the importance, especially to position brand Africa, domestic tourism, intra-regional travel, etc. But just to let the audience know that we're happy to receive the feedback. Stay tuned. I know you mentioned about data. In the coming week, we will have another session where we will bring some experts from Africa to talk precisely about data, so that as well that we are joining you in this journey in the recovery process. So once again, thank you all, and thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Marcelo.
Thank you. Thank you, Elsa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you very much. Yes, cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.